Hey everyone, how you doing today? Lovely Saturday night. Glad to be here with all of you. It is absolutely a pleasure to spend my Saturday evening at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with all of you. So glad you're joining us. I've got my standard YouTube live performance, the way we do things. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, share this on Reddit, share this on Facebook, tweet this out, bring more people here, because the more people here, the more fun we are going to have. Now, the way we do these lives is I give my opening remarks, and then from there we do our roll call and see who's watching. And then from there, I answer your super chat questions. And the show keeps going as long as your super chat questions keep coming in. So, by all means, send a good super chat question. I will give you a good answer. It'll be a good answer in my opinion, not necessarily your opinion, but that's okay. And it's great. Folks, I got to tell you, today, they haven't closed the gyms in New York again yet, but the gym in my neighborhood closed at 4 p.m., and I still wanted to do some working out. So I actually started doing an online workout, and I did an evening workout here. I did a 30-minute workout. Amazing stuff, right? My heart is, even though it's 11:30 at night, and I would usually be quite tired because I just did the workout and took a great shower, my heart is now racing. So hopefully I'll be bringing you all a good 30-minute cardio workout from your home level of energy. That'll be good. So, but we shall see. My opening remarks tonight are not going to be necessarily related to current events, though we're all a little bit worried about Iran. The rumor mill seems to indicate that Donald Trump is going to try to escalate things with Iran as much as he possibly can before leaving office in January. And that is absolutely terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. So for those of us where Iran is a country that we don't want to go to war with, those of us who believe in peace and not war, those of us who don't buy into the idea that the Wall Street imperialists want peace, you know, I think we're all a little bit nervous. So if you're a religious person, say a prayer for the people of Iran and the people of the world about the danger of a new war. And if you are not a religious person, by all means, try to spread good energy in your community. But we are all deeply worried about the situation regarding Iran right now. After the brutal assassination, the act of terrorism against a scientist engaged in peaceful scientific activities with Iran's nuclear power facilities, right? Not a weapons program. So thank you, Patrick, for your super chat. So the situation in Iran is on our minds heavily. I talked a lot about it last night. We can get into it again if it comes up in the Q&A and the super chats. So that's not really, though, how I wanted to talk about my super chats for tonight. So I'm going to jump right into it. I've got my opening remarks, and from there we'll do our roll call, and then from there I'll answer your super chat questions in the order that they come in. I'll be writing them down as they come in. So if you want to get your question on the list, by all means, just shoot me a quick super chat and I will give you the answer that you're looking for. All right, so folks, what I wanted to reference in my opening remarks tonight was a clip that apparently makes its rounds on the woke internet every Thanksgiving. It's a clip from a movie that came out in the year of 1993. Now, the movie is called Addams Family Values. And I remember when I first saw the movie Addams Family Values, I had the VHS tape. I borrowed it from the public library. I was a teenager, and I was not expecting what I saw, right? I had seen one of the Addams Family movies. I'd seen another one of the Addams Family movies. And this was the second of the live-action Addams Family movies, Addams Family Values. And there is a particular climactic moment in that film that is related to Thanksgiving. And it makes its way around the internet every Thanksgiving holiday. And I recently rewatched it, and it made me think. It made me really, really think. And I got to tell you, the first time I saw that scene in Addams Family Values, I just jumped up and cheered. I thought it was the best thing I had ever seen. I had no idea that that would happen. There was no indication, but as somebody who probably was more predisposed to identify with the protagonists, I found it to be just amazingly fulfilling. It was just a huge cathartic release to watch that scene on the film that I was watching. So, what is the scene? For those of you who have not seen Addams Family Values, a comedy film from 1993. First of all, who are the Addams Family, right? Well, we know the Addams Family, right? So they were a television program in the 1960s in the United States, and it's about this family that's supposed to be a typical suburban family, except they're all like characters from a horror movie. And they are like characters from a horror movie. It actually was inspired by Charles Addams, the cartoonist. He drew these cartoons that had a kind of some morbid characters in them. And so it was inspired by that. They made a television program called The Addams Family, which was about this gothic family that seemed like creatures from a horror movie, and interacting with the normal world, and it's a comedy, right? So they made a couple movies based on that 1960s television show, and the second of those films was called Addams Family Values. And basically what happens is a young girl, is at a summer camp, and she's at a summer camp for very, very wealthy children. And she's at this summer camp, and she doesn't fit in, because she's like a character from a horror movie. She's got her long black hair. She's always talking about murder and death and such, and she doesn't quite fit in at this summer camp. But she befriends a young man at the summer camp who also doesn't quite fit in, who's kind of nerdy and has all kinds of allergies, and has a very overbearing mother. And so she kind of befriends this kind of like awkward, nerdy guy who's reading books all the time, who has allergies and has an overbearing mother. And the two of them don't particularly fit in with the very, very wealthy people at this summer camp. And then the climax is that at this summer camp, that this wealthy summer camp that they're performing a play called The First Thanksgiving. And it is a hokey and racially offensive musical telling of the first Thanksgiving. It begins with a bunch of turkeys dancing around saying, "Eat me, eat me." And then from there, the children, where they have the white people, and they start talking about how the Native Americans are going to eat with them, and saying a lot of very, very racist things about the Native Americans. They're dirty, etc. So then, of course, the hero of the film, Wednesday, as they call her, right, the young teenage girl from the Addams Family, Wednesday Addams, comes out dressed as Pocahontas, and then goes immediately off script from the play. And suddenly it's not a kind of racially offensive story about the first Thanksgiving. Suddenly she's talking about how the Native Americans are oppressed, and how there's going to be a genocide of the Native people. And then suddenly she and a couple of the other misfit kids, as the Native Americans, attack and destroy the set. And they light the set on fire. And it's just this amazingly satisfying feeling that you get. And it's like, it's like this group of very, very snobbish, racist, elitist, kind of bullying white kids that have kind of tortured Wednesday and, throughout the film, are all kind of suffering in this explosion of anger. And the anger comes with a kind of Howard Zinn narrative, right? Howard Zinn, and there's the book Lies My Teacher Told Me. They do a very good job of refuting that whole myth of the first Thanksgiving, right? And they rip to shreds the myth of the first Thanksgiving, the idea that the Pilgrims were just so kind to the Native people, which in reality the Pilgrims were quite brutal to the Native people. They walk onto the stage with the Howard Zinn narrative, and then proceed to light the set on fire, act crazy, I watched this clip, right? So the movie came out in 1993, Addams Family Values. And I watched it and I wondered, like, nowadays, does it translate? Right? Because first of all, I feel like nowadays, right, at the time that came out, that was seen as very edgy and leftist, right? It's like like the Native Americans are taking revenge on the white people. The Howard Zinn narrative that the first Thanksgiving was a racist myth that's propagated to school children. And an explosion of violence and rage. But nowadays, I wonder, first of all, if you'd be able to get away with it, because you are, after all, having a bunch of non-Native American children in their cathartic act of revenge dressing up in Native American costumes, right? And the way that they're, woo-wooing with their, it's a little bit offensive, Slovoj Žižek, right? So even though it's attempting to give an anti-racist message, it's still, a racist caricature of Native Americans. The other thing that struck me about it was that I almost feel like, in a weird way, now it's almost like, in a weird way, the opposite. Like, I could imagine a group of working class kids going to this summer camp, and instead of being bullied, by racist wealthy kids, being bullied by wealthy kids who probably have huge amounts of class privilege and arrogance, but walk around, rather than saying racist things, walk around using the SJW vocabulary and constantly ridiculing the more working class kids for not knowing the proper SJW vocabulary. And that there is, oddly, an element of class privilege in some of what the SJW left do. Right? It's like we have this special vocabulary that we learned at Harvard and Yale and NYU, in which we've learned all kinds of ways to ridicule other people for being racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, or whatever in the way they speak. And on top of that, we love to lord over other people and ridicule and shame other people, especially other people that might have a more working class background, might come from a more traditional home or whatnot. So I wondered if one could even reverse it now. And it was interesting to watch. But the main thing is, I remember how satisfied I felt when I watched that film. And watched that explosion. And as I watched the clip of that particular scene, right, that explosion of anger, Wednesday walks onto the stage. We've decided to burn your village to the ground, scalp you or whatnot. And her like little boyfriend that she has at the summer camp, who's got he's wheezing all the time and is reading books or whatever. He takes revenge on his parents at one point, right? In his Native American costume, he I forget what he does. He knocks his parents, they fall over or something. And it struck me as this is kind of what I was getting at in the Kamala Harris book. In the second chapter of the Kamala Harris book, I end by talking about left-wing politics becoming a crude Freudian manipulation, right? Because while it's very satisfying to see these stuck-up, racist, bully kids get, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Get revenged, have their comeuppance, get sandbagged, I guess, get mugged by reality, have their little offensive play ruined. While it's kind of satisfying to watch, at the end of the day, other than deconstructing the racist myth of Thanksgiving and exposing the genocide of Native Americans, what is really accomplished in that scene, right? That a situation where people are angry and containing their anger is replaced by chaos. There's some kind of Freudian thing going on with the boy attacking his parents. And that it is just kind of like, it gives you a satisfaction because the pent-up rage and frustration that you have is released. And that gives you a big satisfaction when you watch it. There is this big satisfaction that these arrogant, upper crust racist, I think the girl Sarah Miller, who has the blonde hair, and is constantly, saying mean, nasty things and bullying Wednesday. Sarah Miller, the fact that she gets like tied to a tree and has an apple put in her mouth and is almost lit on fire, and you get this satisfaction from the feelings that are restrained being released. That's a huge satisfaction, right? The pent up feelings of frustration are released, right? It's hugely satisfying. Plus, on top of that, the myth that Thanksgiving was, it's the Native Americans and the Pilgrims all just got along and all that. That's refuted, right? And the whitewashing skit is racist propaganda, as someone points out. Right, so in a way it's good, but at the end of the day, right? I mean, is anything really, really, really accomplished in that moment, right? You're satisfied as the viewer. You watch it and you're satisfied. And what I guess the only accomplishment really is that the racist myth of Thanksgiving is ripped to shreds. I mean, that's good. But other than that, right, is that really progressive? It's just kind of deconstruction and unleashing of pent-up feelings. It's just kind of the unleashing of destructive rage and impulses. And what's particularly interesting, so the film came out in 1993. And it shows kind of, it fits that moment in history, oddly, right? So, in the 1960s, you couldn't have made that film because in the 1960s, the knowledge that the myth of Thanksgiving was a myth, wasn't true, was so rare among the population that they wouldn't have gotten it. They would have just been horrified, right? And you couldn't make that film now because, first of all, I mean, it would seem so unrealistic that kids at a summer camp would be doing a play that was so blatantly racist and offensive. That wouldn't seem realistic. I mean, the notion that a wealthy summer camp would do a play where they're, putting down on people for not being white and such, it's not realistic, right? And it was a product of its time, and it really kind of, if you think about it, right, that is kind of the spot that the Gen X radicals were kind of stuck in, right? So you had the upsurge of the 1960s. You had suddenly kind of a break in 1950s America, people refusing to fight in Vietnam, people talking about racism and how the United States had been founded on slavery, the Native American movement. You had all these kind of breakthroughs coming out of the 1960s, but as the late Cold War sets in, that solid core, that silent majority of America, they reassert their control. But there still remains this fringe of U.S. society that knows it's all a big lie, right? There still remains this section of U.S. society that is cursed with the knowledge and is in opposition, right? Is the movement or activists, right? And what they go around doing is essentially crashing other people's parties, right? The rest of U.S. society is trying to just say America is the greatest country in the world, America never does anything wrong, and that what's left over from the 1960s, right? The left, the organized political left, is a group of people that are smart enough, people that are knowledgeable enough, and people that are non-conforming enough to just kind of go around every so often crashing the party for the rest of the country that still lives in this illusion that everything's okay. And that's kind of the role, right? I mean, if you look at what leftists were in the 80s and in the 90s, basically leftists were Wednesday. They were Wednesday in that movie. They were going around crashing the party. They were crashing the party, disrupting, and reminding people that the United States was a country founded on slavery and genocide, that America's wars are not good, that there are people being exploited in the third world. But there was never any notion that they would develop a mass base, right? It was assumed that because the country was so prosperous, because there was so much class peace and stability in the country, there was no illusion. Wednesday's not trying to recruit the audience of that play. She's not trying to win over any of the people. I mean, she's not doing that, right? Her job is to just kind of be this kind of performance artist / wrecker who kind of every so often makes a statement that shakes people up and like puts the country on notice of things they want to pretend are not there. That's kind of the role that the U.S. left was reduced to playing during the period of reaction, the 1980s and the 1990s. That's kind of the role that the left played. The left was a group of people who made it their mission to put America on notice about the realities that nobody in the country wanted to acknowledge, right? As far as most of the country was concerned, yes, there was issues with civil rights in the 1960s. Yes, the Vietnam War hadn't worked out too well. But aside from that, this was the greatest country in the world, and capitalism was the best system ever. Look, the Soviet Union collapsed, clearly, and everything was fine. And the role that the left played is they were like kind of this annoying buzz in the ear of society that sometimes got louder and sometimes got quieter, that was just kind of reminding people everything's not okay. That was kind of what the left did. They were that they were like, it's kind of like the Lorax, right? You ever read the Dr. Seuss story, the Lorax? I am the Lorax, I speak for the trees, right? It's kind of like that. Or better yet, right? I remember when I was a leftist. Well, I'm still a leftist, right? But when I was a member of a left-wing organization that was a political Marxist party, every year we used to go to Boston, not Boston. We used to go to Plymouth for a protest against Thanksgiving. On Thanksgiving, it was called the Day of Mourning, and we used to go every year to the Day of Mourning. And it was this protest against the myth of the first Thanksgiving, right? And, every year in Plymouth there is some kind of like parade honoring the coming of the Mayflower. And, 80s, 90s, the organized political left made it kind of their mission to disrupt that parade, right? There was some real police brutality, I believe, against some of the protesters. One year, they were particularly nasty to them, and so some lawsuits were filed. And as a result, every year there is a native indigenous protest in Plymouth against Thanksgiving that kind of coincides along with the traditional conservative pro-Thanksgiving march. And that gathering, I remember going to it, right? And it was, native leaders, native activists talking about, the genocide of the native people, refuting the myth of the first Thanksgiving, protesting the site where the Mayflower landed, saying that was the beginning of horrendous genocide against the native people. And I mean, you think about the role that leftists played. That was kind of, we were just kind of this annoying fly buzzing in the ear of mainstream America, telling them, no, everything is not all right. No, everything is not all right. And reminding them of the truths that they did not want to hear. That was kind of the role that the U.S. played, the role that the left played in the United States. We were just kind of this voice. We assumed that average middle Americans would never be recruited to us. We assumed that we would never really develop a mass base among the population, but it was our mission to kind of crash the party. And in a way, we were kind of like Wednesday. We were kind of like the Addams Family, while the rest of the country was, watching the Super Bowl and I don't know, and going to the 4th of July to celebrate. We were being dark and bitter and saying July 4th is the celebration of imperialism, and Thanksgiving is the celebration of the murder of native people, and don't you know how evil this country really is? We were this kind of dark, brooding group of people that were like, while everyone was trying to celebrate and be happy and pretend that everything was all okay in the United States, we were this group of dark people who knew the truth and had a much more dark view of the world, right? That's kind of who we were. In a way, we were like the Goths of America, right? We were this group of people who didn't fit in with the rest of the country, refused to go along with the mythology that the rest of the country seemed to hold on to and be based on, and we We made it a point of every so often crashing the party, disrupting things, and making people uncomfortable to remind them of the truth. And that's good. That's a good thing to do. I mean, in those circumstances, when you have a huge aristocracy of labor that's not interested in socialism, right? When you have a huge layer of U.S. society that is not revolutionary, when the socialist movement is kind of in retreat, that's kind of the role that you're reduced to playing, right? You're reduced to being the group of people that is constantly, eerily whispering in everyone's ear the truth that they don't want to hear, right? But historically, though, the role that Gen X radicals played is not the role that genuine Marxists and revolutionaries play. Right? The Communist Party of the 1930s did not play that role. The IWW did not play that role. The Socialist Party of Eugene Debs didn't play that role. Among the black community, the Black Panthers certainly did not play that role, right? The Communist Party of the 1930s was not a group of people who went around whispering in everyone's ear that, this country was founded on slavery and no, capitalism isn't great. No, the Communist Party was an organization that led millions of people in struggle and aspired to become the ruling party for the entire country, right? Same for Eugene Debs. Same for the IWW. These were populists, right? These were organizers who didn't aspire to become this very, very annoying buzzing ear in the country, but rather aspired to become the leaders of the country itself. And instead of going to people who were happy and trying to rain on their parade, the Communist Party, the IWW, went to people who were unhappy and told them why they were unhappy and offered them a revolutionary program through which their grievances could be resolved. That was the role that communists played. They were not Goths, right? They were not the Lorax. They were something very, very, very different than that. Something very, very different than that. And that's not to say that people in the 1990s, 1980s, who were doing the Wednesday thing, protesting in Plymouth on Thanksgiving, marching against every ugly war the imperialists would wage, assuming that the war would still happen, right? Knowing that war was going to happen no matter what, but marching against it anyway. There is now potential for socialists, communists, and revolutionaries in the United States to play a very, very, very different role, to actually break out of that assigned role as the opposition guerrilla theater of American empire and actually get to the masses. And honestly, I think a lot of the communists out there are very afraid of that. They're very afraid of that because this is what they know how to do. They know how to lose. They know how to be in the minority. They know how to play this kind of assigned role that as capitalism and imperialism and neoliberalism keep marching and marching ahead, they will effectively be the assigned protesters against it. They will have the rally against it. That is a role that the left knows how to play, right? They have an assigned place in U.S. society, and they know how to stay in that spot and make the noise every so often, remind everybody of the thing. But things have changed. Things have very, very much changed. First of all, right, like I said, there would never be that racist Thanksgiving play that Wednesday disrupts would never be performed at a summer camp now, especially not among the rich and powerful, right? We've had kind of an SJW upgrade in the United States at this point, right? Because imperialism is contending with Russia and China, and because of the fact that we have a more globalized economy now, there has been a big, big effort in the United States to really, really make Western capitalism and imperialism seem like it is sensitive to the struggles of colonized peoples around the world, to the struggles of non-white people, to the struggles of indigenous populations. There's a huge, huge effort to make imperialism seem woke, number one. And number two, right? There's also a lot of people within the imperialist homeland who are angry at society, angry at the system, and actively looking for ideologies with which to express their anger and have their grievances addressed. This is a whole new situation. But I think that the problem that many of the organized communist and socialist groups have is that they're still stuck on that role of being Wednesday in the Addams Family movie, right? They just want to, every so often, disrupt the Thanksgiving Day parade, the Thanksgiving Day play. And that's a good thing to do. There's nothing wrong with disrupting the Thanksgiving Day play. It needs to be done. But now we are in a situation where capitalism is in crisis, and we actually have the ability to get to the masses. So we need to aim higher. We need to aim higher than that. But if we're going to aim higher, we are going to have to break with some of the old habits. We cannot simply function as the loyal opposition to empire, the assigned protesters any longer. So watching that clip from that 1993 movie that I found so satisfying when I first saw it made me think a lot. It's still a great clip. And I recommend it. And it makes its way around the web every Thanksgiving among the woke internet, and it's still very satisfying to watch, especially in the context of the whole film. It's still very, very satisfying to watch. But at the end of the day, just releasing those impulses, just tearing down, just raining on the parade, just disrupting an offensive Thanksgiving parade and getting revenge against, the bully and your parents, replacing an order that is unjust with chaos, releasing impulses, that in and of itself is not revolutionary. Right? This is what I got to in my Kamala Harris book. Right? Kamala Harris is a woman who's clearly suffered a lot. Right? We don't know to the extent or what exactly Kamala Harris suffered from. She's clearly been a victim in her life. Right? I mean, she talks about being one of the first children to integrate her school. Right? One of the first children bused to an integrated school in Berkeley and Oakland, California. She talks about neighbors not, being allowed to play with her because she's black. But it's more than that, right? She hates her father. There was a very ugly divorce and a custody battle, and she and her father are not on good terms with each other. Her father has denounced her in the press. And Kamala Harris has been wronged. There is no question about it. Now, we don't know what happened. And in my book, I get into great detail trying to explore what possibly happened, right? I mean, is it possible that her father abused her? Is it possible that her father did nothing wrong, but the mother scapegoated the father? We don't know exactly what happened. But Kamala Harris's father was not a part of her life from about the time she was 8 years old until, now. And he's denounced her campaign in the press. He called her out. He gave statements to the media, denouncing her campaign, calling it a travesty of identity politics. Kamala Harris's father was a Marxian economist who advised various presidents of Jamaica, and is kind of a social democrat. He and Kamala don't get along. And in the book, I go into great detail. I've done a lot of research. I quote an essay that he wrote and all of this. I go into great detail what happened. We don't really know. All we can really do is speculate. Kamala loves her mother. Kamala's mother is a saint. But Kamala's father, she barely ever references him, and he has denounced the hell out of her. So they're not getting along too well. Add to that the fact that Kamala Harris brings up her childhood excessively, constantly. She talks about her childhood. She has campaign shirts with 10-year-old Kamala Harris on them. That little girl was me. Constantly, she talks about being a child in places that it is not even appropriate. She justifies prosecuting. She talks about the fact that she jailed parents because their kids were truant from school. And she justifies that by invoking her own childhood. I would never be where I am if it weren't for my education. And so I decided that depriving a child of an education is tantamount to a crime. It's like she's justifying her actions as a criminal prosecutor based on she wouldn't be on her own experiences. So Kamala Harris is somebody who has a huge amount of pain in her past, has been wronged, has suffered, feels like she's a victim, and seems to have the image of her childhood self, her 10-year-old self. That little girl was me flickering in her mind all the time. And on top of that, now in her adulthood, what is Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris is a sadistic, cruel person. I mean, she's a person who tried to kill an innocent man, right? There was a man on death row in California. DNA evidence could have been acquired and was acquired against her wishes, and he was taken off of death row. But she tried to prevent DNA evidence from being acquired because she was so desperate to kill this man. She was desperate to kill this man. She was so thrilled about the idea that she could take someone's life, that she tried to prevent DNA evidence from being acquired. Never occurred to Kamala Harris, like, geez, is it possible that maybe we ought to get this DNA evidence, because I sure would hate to have on my conscience for years that I killed an innocent person? No! Didn't occur to her, right? Kamala Harris and her office in California when she was Attorney General was constantly being called out by judges for misconduct. They hid evidence. They did things to try and put innocent people in jail. So Kamala Harris has this image in her mind. She sees herself as a victim, right? She's been wronged by the world, wronged by her father somehow, wronged by society. She is a victim. Kamala Harris thinks she's a victim, and she has that image of her childhood self that was wronged, constantly flickering in her mind. And now as an adult, she's capable of just the most cruel, ruthless behavior based on the fact that she seems indifferent to the suffering of others, right? The world needs to understand that that little girl was her. The world needs to understand what happened to her. And it doesn't matter, right? She destroys the lives of children. She just, by putting their parents in jail because they didn't go to school. She locks up thousands of people and then smokes marijuana herself. She doesn't care about other people, right? It's about extracting revenge on the world, right? That she can just unleash that rage, that deep pent-up rage that she has at the world. The world was unfair to her. The world was unfair to her. And she can just unleash that rage on the world without any remorse for other people. She doesn't care about other people. Other people, right? She might have killed Kevin Cooper. Who cares, right? The important thing is that she gets her vengeance, that she releases her impulses. And the important thing we're supposed to remember about Kamala Harris, it's not anything that she's ever done, anything she's ever achieved. We're supposed to remember that, look, it used to be that women did not occupy high-ranking positions like prosecutor, like vice president of the United States. It used to be that people of color did not occupy positions like prosecutor and criminal. But look how beautiful it is that a woman of color, a woman of Indian and Jamaican descent is now in the position of locking people in jail and punishing people. It's so satisfying for all of us. We're supposed to be satisfied along with her, that she, whatever bad thing happened to little Kamala, now she can wreak vengeance on the world because she is in a position that historically, people of her gender, people of her race did not occupy. Right? It is a beautiful thing that she is wreaking destruction on the world. It's a beautiful thing that she's able to be in that spot and punish people and destroy lives and maybe even kill people who don't deserve it. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing, right? And we're supposed to think about 10-year-old Kamala and think that little girl was her, and now that little girl has come back. It's like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, right? Right at the beginning of the movie, the hero is tortured and treated badly, and his wife and kids are killed. But then there's that satisfying scene at the end of the movie where the hero bursts open the door and unfurls the gun and blows away the bad guy. Right? It's such a demented, crude Freudian manipulation. That's what's going on here, right? It's supposed to give us all satisfaction that Kamala was wronged, and now she is a strong, powerful woman who can destroy and kill and murder. This is supposed to fill us with satisfaction. It's supposed to fill us with great satisfaction. And this is all that left-wing politics is supposed to be. Right? Left-wing politics is supposed to be the urge for that catharsis, the urge for that satisfaction. The opening scene of the movie is poor 10-year-old Kamala being mistreated, and the climax of the movie is when Kamala Harris becomes president and drops an atomic bomb and blows up the world and laughs about it maniacally. That's how we're supposed to see this, right? Right? This is how we're supposed to see this. And we're supposed to think it's amazing. And that's all there is to it. We're supposed to see this in this crude emotional way. Right? The hero is wronged. The hero goes through hardships, climbs up the mountain, and gets into a powerful position and extracts revenge on those who wronged them. This is how we're supposed to see it. It has nothing to do with socialism. It has nothing to do with Marxism. It has nothing to do with class struggle, with economics. It's all just this very, very, very strange, emotionally loaded story. And that's what left-wing politics has become. It has become this cathartic desire to unleash impulses, to unleash rage, to unleash our inner desires for destruction. This is what left-wing politics has been reduced to. But, as I point out in my book on Kamala Harris, this is not what left-wing politics is. There's a whole tradition. Dialectical materialism, historical materialism. There's the experience of the Soviet Union building itself up into a global superpower. There's the experience of China going from one of the poorest countries in the world to becoming, a huge, huge economic powerhouse of production. There's a lot more to left-wing politics than simply this cathartic story that I just shared with you. I loved the Addams Family movie. Trust me, when I saw Wednesday walk onto the stage and, extract revenge and unleash chaos, it was very satisfying. It's a great movie. It's a great scene. You can't not be satisfied watching that scene in Addams Family Values. I mean, it's extremely, extremely satisfying, and it's a great movie. And it really depicts, essentially, the role that leftists were stuck in. We were stuck in that spot during the 1980s, during the 1990s. That's where we were. We were the outcasts of America, reminding people of the truths that they didn't want to hear. We were those of us who were bold enough to actually know the truth, who dared to know the truth, and dared to not shut up about the truth that we knew. That's the role that we played in U.S. society in the 90s. But socialism and Marxism and class struggle is about so much more than that. The Wobblies, the IWW, the Socialist Party of Eugene Debs, the Communist Party of the 1930s, William Z. Foster, Gus Hall, Huey Newton, Paul Robeson, Claudia Jones, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. So much more than just that role as the assigned fringe of American society. And if we leftists don't figure out how to get out of this trap, on how to get to the masses and how to rediscover dialectical and historical materialism, how to rediscover Marxist economics, how to become champions, not of the angry minority of U.S. society, not of the angry woke minority and fringe of U.S. society, but rather champions of the great majority of America's people against the ruthless ruling class. How we can build solidarity and class struggle. If we can't figure out that, things aren't going to get better. Because the rage that is boiling deep within middle America right now, and there's plenty of rage boiling right now, mass unemployment, rising police state, hungry children, crumbling roads. There is deep, deep anger and rage boiling inside of middle America right now. You betcha. The American people, in their millions, are ready to fight. They're angry. This system has made their lives unlivable. Oh yes, the American people are angry. And if we can't figure out a way that the class struggle, the struggle for socialism, harnesses that anger, somebody else will. It won't be somebody good. It won't be somebody good. Look, they're already doing it. The Trump movement is hijacking that anger. The synthetic woke left is hijacking that anger. There are forces that are very, very happy to hijack that anger, but they don't have real answers. The only way out of this crisis is for the banks, factories, and industries, the major centers of economic power, to be controlled by the people. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. I've repeated this slogan over and over again. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. I've said, look, 4 steps. We carried out these 4 steps, the United States would be on the road to socialism. We would be transitioning. Step number 1, a mass reconstruction of the country, mobilizing millions of people, the unemployed youth, the underemployed, hiring millions of people to rebuild the country, rebuild the roads, rebuild the highways, rebuild the crumbling infrastructure, rebuild the power plants, the water treatment facilities, new schools for all the young people, new universities, right? High-speed railway, right? High-quality Wi-Fi internet in every corner of the country, new tech facilities, mass reconstruction of the country, a mobilization of the population to do what the capitalist market has failed to do, right? Mobilize the population. Mobilize the population to build. That would be step number 1. Step number 2 would be public control of our natural resources. The oil of this country, the coal of this country, the natural gas of this country, the timber of this country should be the property of all people living in this country. And the profits made from it should go into the public budget, not into the hands of some banker or billionaire who's got a name like Rockefeller or Carnegie or DuPont or Coke. No. America's natural resources should be declared public property, and the profits from them should go into the public budget so we can fund this great project to rebuild the country. Step number 3 would be public control of banking. Right? Maybe the Communist Manifesto is too radical for you. Well, read the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution makes it very, very clear that only the federal government can print money, not a private corporation run by bankers like the Federal Reserve. No, only the federal government can print money. Furthermore, maybe the Communist Manifesto or Marx and Lenin are too radical for you. Read the Bible. Read the Quran. Read the Torah and the Talmud. Every major religion forbids the lending of money at interest by individuals. It says that the lending of money at interest is called usury. And the reason it was forbidden by every major religion is because usury leads to a creditor class emerging. When people make money by having money. They lend money and get it back with interest. They make money simply by having money. They produce wealth without producing anything. Nothing is created. It is sterile wealth. They have made money simply out of money. Money has turned into more money. And that is dangerous. And it leads to a creditor class, a group of bankers who continue to make money by having more money until they get to the point that all of society is in debt to them. Governments are in debt to them. Major corporations are in debt to them. Everyone is in debt to them. And pretty soon they have all the power. Well, the lending of money should be a monopoly in the hands of the state. The community should decide how money is spent and how credit is assigned, right? If somebody wants to start a business, they need to not go to a private banker. They need to instead go to the community and make the case that their business, their project, will benefit the community. And if their project will benefit the community, then the community will give them the money, lend them the money to do it. And when they pay back their loan, the money will then go into the public budget so we can have more things like schools and hospitals, etc. Right? No more credit card ripoff schemes. No more mortgage lender ripoffs. The state and the community, popular power, should control the lending of money. That's step number 3. Step number 4 would be the enactment of an economic bill of rights. The right to a job, the right to housing, the right to education, the right to see a doctor when you're sick. Roosevelt proposed an economic bill of rights in his final years. So if we did those 4 things, if we had a mass mobilization of the country to rebuild, something that made Roosevelt's Works Progress administration look like child's play, if we mobilized a huge 5-year plan, national mobilization of reconstruction of the United States, number 1. If we then put under public control America's natural resources, we then put under public control, the banking sector. If then on top of that we enacted an economic bill of rights, if we did those 4 things, at that point we would have a government of action that would fight for working families. We would have a worker and farmer government. We would have a people's democracy in the United States. No more would we have a government in Washington, D.C. that did the bidding of the ultra-rich. In order to get those 4 demands enacted, there would have to be such a politicization and a mobilization of the population that at that point, socialism would be not too far off. We would have a government, a people's democratic government, an anti-monopoly state that would be powerful enough that we could soon walk toward a stateless and classless world. We could soon be a socialist society. We need a government of action to fight for working families. And we need to restructure American leftism away from simply being the opposition and disruptors to American empire, but toward being the mobilizers of the majority of people who've been left out and are suffering amid this economic crisis. We need to position ourselves to be the champions of working people in the time of crisis, the champions of the majority of America, which are workers and farmers, people who are suffering, people who aren't part of the billionaire elite that run the country, people that aren't in there with Jeff Bezos, people who aren't in there with Bill Gates, people who aren't in there with the Koch brothers, people who aren't in there with Betsy DeVos, people who aren't benefiting and living in splendor while the country falls to shreds. We need to be the champions for the majority. What does the word Bolshevik mean? Majority. Now we know that's because when Lenin formed the party, the majority of the people in the room went with him, the minority didn't, Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. But at the time of the Russian Revolution, do you think that average workers in Russia were knowing in great detail about all these things? No. The Bolsheviks were known as the party that fought for the majority. The Bolsheviks were the majoritarians, the party that fights for the majority. And on top of that, they were the anti-war guys. They were for peace, land, and bread, but peace was the top priority. The Mensheviks, the Constitutional Democrats, all the other parties wanted to keep World War I going. But the Bolsheviks were the anti-war party, the party that wanted to stop the war immediately. The Bolsheviks. And the Bolsheviks, not only did they want to stop the war, they wanted to stop the war because the war was bad for the majority. It was good for the minority of capitalists and billionaires and monopolists and autocrats and nobles. But the war was bad for the majority. The workers and the peasants of Russia were the majority. And the Bolsheviks fought for the majority. And part of fighting for the majority was ending the war. This is the mindset. This is the kind of thinking that a political party has when it is on the verge of taking power. It becomes the champion of the forgotten, left-behind majority against the powerful ruling elite. Right? This is the kind of politics those of us who are serious about seeing a socialist America need to adopt. This is what we need. So, think about what I just said and chew on it. I just had a great time telling it to you. Folks, if you're just joining us now, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. I'm glad you're here. The way we do our show is we have our opening remarks. Then I do my roll call. I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I answer your super chat questions. So we just finished our opening remarks. I had a great time telling them to you. So now we are going to do, at this point, after I take a drink of water, we are going to do our roll call. But folks, in order to make the second half of the show interesting, you have to give me some super chat questions. So keep that in mind. So, I've only got one super chat question waiting here. So in order to keep the show going, make it an entertaining second half, you need to come up with some questions for me to answer. So I'm awaiting your questions, but now let's do the roll call. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Vancouver, John McClellan is with us. Rocky from Reno, Nevada. Santa Clarita. Very good. San Jose. Big Oil Glut. Joey from Belize. JT24 in Mississippi. Kieran from San Diego. Somewhere, USA. Elijah from Newark, Ohio. Cincinnati, Ohio. Jenny Lynn. Washington State. Toronto. Missouri via Northern California. Robert from Hawaii. Seattle. Hawthorne, New Jersey. Tommy Ferras in Sicily. Maryland. Marietta, Georgia. Austin, Texas. Mike Martinez, longtime friend, says solidarity from Miami. Well, great to hear from you, Mike. I'm so glad you're on. Welcome, Mike. Glad you're on with us tonight. Solidarity from Miami. Portland, Oregon. Palm Beach Gardens. Will Greenock from Scotland. Adam from Island County, Washington State. Ithaca, New York. Michael is with us. Michigan, whateverville. Dietrich from Lincoln, Nebraska. Paragus from Los Angeles. Son himself told me. Jacksonville, Florida. Alex Suarez. Springfield, Missouri. Camel spider attack. Indonesia is with us tonight. Indonesia. Donna Dove, Southern Oregon, Norway. Palo Round Mountain, California. Mourning, Macedonia. Alberta, Canada. Seattle. Wilmington, Delaware. How have you been, Mike? Montana. Pennsylvania, USA. Solidarity forever. Trump County, West Virginia. Auckland, New Zealand. Albany, New York. Ecuador. Nevada. Ever see the debate I did with Caleb? Rio de Janeiro. Charlie from Ottawa. Why could lunar soil save the earth? Shanghai, China. Do we need a government of action or our government of action? How do we control centralized power? Good question. Control, centralized power, writing it down. Very, very, very good question. Very good stuff, right? Wilmington, Delaware, Auckland, New Zealand. Trump equals devil. Farhad, North Carolina, Silicon Valley. Los Angeles, New York City, Hollyhorn. Cleveland, Anthony Penza. De Pere, Wisconsin. Las Vegas. Las Vegas, very good. Ryan Preston. Logan in Utah, hydrogen 3 fusion. Very good. Very, very good. Alrighty, folks. Anyone else? Names and locations. Vallejo, California. Vallejo, California. Jason Sarna is with us tonight. Niagara Falls, New York. Niagara Falls. And slowly I turned, and step by step, inch by inch, strike in India. Strike in India. Shaniqua from Buffalo, New York is with us tonight. It's helium-3, someone points out, not hydrogen-3. Very, very, very good. Very, very, very good point. Right? What else? What else? Names and locations, folks. I will call you out as I see you. Let me make the live chat. Oh, wow, something just went by. What do you think the ramifications would be if a progressive party to the left of the Democratic Party is elected to the White House in terms of foreign relations? Very good. Progressive Party, foreign relations. Very, very good question. All righty. All righty. Who else is with us tonight? Water in the battery from Greenland. Okay. All righty. Very good. Very, very good. How have they swept the Iraq War under the rug? Very good question. Iraq War under the rug. Man, I could rant about that for hours, and I probably will. Probably will. All righty. Very, very good. What else is new, folks? Any other names and locations for me to call out before we start hammering out these super chats? Anything else? Pirate Alex is in Cleveland. Gopnik Raptor says Wazup. Brazil, Rafael Lisboa. Brooklyn, Anisha is with us. Nick from HB. Julian from Melbourne is with us. Abhinav is from India. Do you have diet water? No, just regular water. Imperialism and brain drain. Very good. Very, very, very good. Imperialism and brain drain. And brain drain. Very, very good. Very good question. All right. Follow up on your previous socialist city question. What about starting a new city with publicly owned industries? Soviet planned micro districts. City of socialism. Micro districts. Very good. All righty. All righty. I guess we'll just start answering the super chat questions. Keep them coming in, and I'll keep answering them. And we're going to have a lovely evening here tonight. It's a great way to spend your Saturday evening here with me. All right, and with you, right? We're a community here. We have our running jokes about unnamed diet beverage, right? We have our regulars that are here. I see the same people in the chats, and we live for this, right? We love this. We love this, right? We love doing this, right? If this pandemic ever ends, I probably won't be able to do this as much as I once did. I'll probably have like places to go and stuff. But right now, we're on the verge of locking down once again here in New York City. So, it looks like we're here, and who knows? Maybe I'll just keep doing this forever, right? Maybe things will never get back to normal. Don't say that too loud. All righty. Slovoj Žižek, that was the first question. Well, I had a great time. My old roommate and I, we went to go see the movie The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, and we had a great time. It's Slovoj Žižek using his Marxist and Freudian perspective to dissect a number of movies. Very entertaining to give his analysis of various movies. Peace without justice is surrender. Bolsheviks should have demanded justice for World War I. Did not. Okay, all right. Bolsheviks. World War I ended. Plenty to talk about there. Slovoj Žižek. I will say that, Slavoj Žižek, he kind of came out of nowhere, intellectual from the former Yugoslavia, who became the big Marxist philosopher that everyone knows about. There were a lot of people who were a little bit frustrated. Self-determination for Native Hawaiians, self-determination for Hawaii. Alrighty. There were a lot of people who were very frustrated. And it seemed like he was not somebody who'd been in the Marxist circles, but somehow because of academia, he got to be the big Marxist. He takes some interesting positions. He does speak positively of Stalin, but he speaks positively of Stalin in kind of a strange way where he agrees with a lot of the allegations against Stalin. He just, feels like Stalin is a kind of a good figure in a Freudian sense. He's like a fatherly figure who tells us right from wrong. And, he's an interesting intellectual. I'll say that about Slavoj Žižek. At the end of the day, though, I wouldn't really call him a revolutionary. I would call him kind of a Marxian academic. He's very anti-China, and I don't think that's particularly helpful. His debate with Jordan Peterson was interesting. Jordan Peterson revealed himself to be an utterly ignorant fool about Marxism, something that he's constantly educating his audience about. As he has no clue about what the Communist Manifesto even means, and he's trying to psychoanalyze the Communist Manifesto. But then Zizek kind of comes back with this very, very, I don't know, this kind of like philosophical, China is a threat kind of, and I don't know. Zizek's not where I'm at, but he's certainly entertaining. I do pay attention to what he says. Every so often he will say things that kind of break from the standard left script, and very good. Very good question from Mike Martinez. Sam Marcy's International Class War document from 1949. Wow. All right. Mike, Global Class War document. All righty. There you go. All right. So that's Slavoj Žižek. How do we control centralized power? Well, the thing is that every socialist society that has ever happened, the only way you're able to overturn capitalism is with a huge mobilization of the population. And that I have seen with my own eyes. And this is something, people want to make a big deal about the fact that in a lot of socialist countries, we don't have the level of freedom of speech that we have in the United States. People don't have the same civil liberties. But one thing that is true for every socialist society is that the government draws its support from a huge, well-organized population. In Cuba, in every neighborhood, they have the local Committee to Defend the Revolution, the CDR, right? In Venezuela and in Bolivia and in Nicaragua, they have the Bolivarian circles, they're called. In Iran, they have the Basij councils. In China, the Communist Party is in every neighborhood, right? And that the only way an anti-capitalist state is able to stay in power is by having a well-organized, mobilized population to back it up. How do you deal with the Marx was an anti-Semite thing? Okay, all right. Marx, anti-Semite. And that's the truth. The only way any socialist government is able to stay in power is by having a well-mobilized population. And that in and of itself forces the socialist state to be accountable to the population. And so that in and of itself is very important. But also, I think it's important to maintain local autonomy to some degree. While you want to have an overall state central plan, you want to give people in a certain region control over their own region. And that socialism, could you talk about Lenotev's book, Political Economy, A Beginner's Course? I'm not familiar with that book, David. I wish I could tell you about it. I just am not familiar with that book. But I'll write that down, and I will actually recommend books on political economy. Book. I'll write that down. I'll get to that. And I'll address that in its own way. But yes, I think it's about maintaining, some level of local autonomy, etc. So, all right. The strike in India. Now, I haven't been following the situation in India currently, but one thing I will say is that there are a lot of great communists in India. When I have gone to international communist gatherings, I have many times met with leaders of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, and they control Kerala, right? The province of Kerala is their province, and they have done an amazing job handling COVID-19. And in fact, The Economist magazine went out of its way to praise Kerala for how well they have handled the pandemic by having healthcare in the community, by organizing people, and they have done an amazing job organizing the community of Kerala, and organizing against COVID-19. There is also a very interesting communist group in India called the Socialist Unity Center of India Communist. They are followers of Shibdas Ghosh. Shibdas Ghosh, he was a Maoist. He was in the Communist Party, but he was more of a more radical. He was a Maoist, but he did not turn against the Soviet Union. He felt the Soviet Union was not capitalist or imperialist. It was simply revisionist. And Shibdas Ghosh, I have some of his writings. He was a leader of the communist movement in India, and he argued that India was developed enough that it could go directly to socialism, while the Maoist groups advocated new democracy in India, while the Communist Party of India advocated kind of a popular front transitional government. The Socialist Unity Center of India was known for the position that they argued that India was able to go immediately to socialism. And they also argue India is an imperialist country because of the role that it plays in Southeast Asia. That's another communist group in India that I have a great amount of respect for. Honestly, folks, I will tell you I am not a huge fan of the Naxals, right? The Naxals, a lot of people romanticize the Naxals because they have guns, right? They do have guns, and they're up in, they're mainly actually in Andhra Pradesh, which is a specific region of India. And, at the end of the day, though, right, India is a country with a huge working class. It's the second largest working class in the entire world. So to be trying to wage a rural people's war among the people in the countryside of India doesn't make sense in this time, right? It made sense in China in the 1930s. But nowadays, in India with a huge industrial working class, why in the world would you be in the countryside trying to wage, guerrilla warfare? And on top of that, if you were fighting for the rights of people in the countryside, which, you need to fight for their rights. People in the countryside suffer quite a bit. But if you're fighting for the rights of rural people in India, wouldn't you seek an alliance with the communists organizing in the cities, with the trade unions, etc.? But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. The Communist Party of India, Marxist, has had leaders of its organization assassinated by the Naxals. Thank you, Herb Bryant. The Socialist Unity Center of India has had leaders of their organization assassinated by the Naxals. The Maoist Naxals that are in the countryside waging guerrilla warfare, they're stuck to this kind of outdated strategy. They're very sectarian, and poverty alleviation in China. And at the end of the day, what they're doing is not a very effective strategy. So, I have great respect for the Communist Party of India, Marxist. I have great respect for the Socialist Unity Center of India. I think there's some other groups in India. There's like the original Communist Party of India is still in existence. And I have a lot of respect for a lot of revolutionary forces in India. I am not a big fan of the Naxals. I'll be honest about that. But look, if the Naxals were able to start, accomplishing good things, and, I might change my position. But at this point, I look at the Naxals and I'm not very impressed with them. And I see them as kind of sectarian, and I see them as not moving in a good direction. That's what I feel. Now, the next question I got is, if a progressive party were to break with the Democratic Party, how would it change foreign relations in Washington, D.C.? Now, when you ask about a progressive party, I assume you're talking about like a Bernie Sanders kind of party. But so I have to ask, is this a question of what if a government in line with what I wanted was elected, or what if a party in line with more the AOC, Bernie Sanders, Ilhan Omar thing? And thank you, Frank, for the super chat. I guess that's the question. I'll answer it in regards to Bernie Sanders and all that. Bernie Sanders was a very enthusiastic supporter of the Iran deal. He wanted to negotiate with Iran very, very strongly. That's very clear. And the AOC, Ilhan Omar wing of American politics, of the Democratic Party, are enthusiastic supporters of negotiating with Iran. And they seem to be more critical of Israel than anyone else in the American apparatus, which is interesting. I mean, they all at least recognize Israel's, as a country, right? They're all two-state solution advocates. They do recognize Israel, which I mean, anti-imperialists around the world do not do, right? I mean, recognizing Israel would be recognizing, a colonial settler state. But at the same time, I think AOC, Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders, they all recognize Israel, but they're more critical of Israel than anybody else really in the American government. I mean, Ilhan Omar, they went after her very viciously. Bernie Sanders, he was when he was a major candidate, he was not invited to speak at the American Israeli Political Action Committee. Um, so that makes me think that they would be far more critical of Israel. They would be far more in favor of negotiating with Iran, and they would probably, in terms of Latin America, be much better. Now, AOC did meet with the coup plotters in Bolivia, and she has made statements about Venezuela and Bolivia that are not so good. And Bernie Sanders has, said things on Maduro that are certainly not good. But at the same time, I get the impression that they would favor a softer approach in Latin America. When it comes to Russia and China, though, I don't see that Bernie wing of the Democratic Party, if they were to break away, form their own party, somehow win the White House, I feel like they would be very hostile to Russia and China. Bernie Sanders has advocated tariffs in some cases that are harsher than what Trump has imposed with his trade war. Um, and on top of that, I mean, in terms of the anti-Russian rhetoric, while Bernie Sanders has emphasized that he would not favor a war with Russia and he would not favor an arms race, he has been very, very anti-Russian and called Putin a tyrant and claimed, Putin's trying to take over Europe and threatening NATO allies, all that kind of stuff. So I feel like the Bernie Sanders squad wing would probably be harder on Russia and China. I feel like they would probably be more friendly to Latin America and Iran, right? And less friendly to Israel. Found out Tony Blinken's dad was a lawyer who was confident of Ghislaine Maxwell's dad. Will Biden's regime continue to Trump's aggression with Iran? So, all right, Biden, aggression, Iran. Very good question. All right. Okay. Alrighty. So, but in terms of what I would want, I mean, if I were president, Spencer Biden. All right. Spencer for Biden. If I were president, I would immediately have the United States join the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Right? We would join the Belt and Road Initiative of China, and we would cooperate with China in building infrastructure around the developing world. We would join China's efforts, right? And the United States and China would start going to developing countries and building infrastructure. That would be the first thing, right? In the countries throughout the world where people don't have running water and don't have electricity, those folks, they need power plants, they need water treatment facilities, they need schools, and the United States would immediately be involved in helping the developing world to industrialize and develop so that it could be more stable, and especially the Middle East. I mean, at one point there was a plan that was proposed by the Soviet Union that they were going to go to the Arab countries and they were going to build from Siberia down to the Arab countries a great irrigation system. And they would irrigate the Middle East so that all the Middle Eastern countries that have oil and sand that are desertous could start growing their own food, and that there would be an agricultural boom throughout the Middle East due to a great irrigation project from the Soviet Union. That would be amazing, right? Because the trap that the Middle East is in is that it's the world's oil colony, basically. Well, if the Middle East suddenly was able to have its own agrarian projects, right? We could grow food in the deserts of the Middle East. That could just change things tremendously, right? And if we could industrialize the countries of the Middle East, so their economies weren't just centered around oil, they had steel manufacturing, they had computer manufacturing. If we could get corners of the world that remain non-industrialized to start being booming centers of industry. That would be a huge thing. And there's plenty of money to be made in that, right? It would end the monopoly of the big oil bankers on Wall Street and the big tech monopolies in the United States. But if parts of the world that are just held as captive, impoverished vassal states were suddenly booming centers of industry, that would be a huge breakthrough. And that would be the change, right? The road to peace is industrialization. The road to peace is economic development. right? The reason people join terrorist groups, the reason people join narco gangs is because they lack economic opportunity. That's why. When people can't get a good job, when people can't feed their kids, when people live in communities where they're starving and desperate, that's when they join terrorist groups and narco gangs. So the way to prevent people from joining terrorist groups and narco gangs is by allowing economic development, allowing the economy to flourish, right? And through economic development, we could stabilize whole regions that are unstable, right? Central America has had a problem with drug gangs and all of that. Industrialize it, raise people out of poverty, right? Eliminate illiteracy, do what the Sandinistas of Nicaragua have done, and build schools and hospitals, enable people to become micro entrepreneurs, right? The road to peace is economic development. And the Soviet Union was trying to do this despite huge U.S. efforts. China is trying to do it. China is trying to do it with the Belt and Road Initiative. Well, I would like the United States to be involved in that. Instead of attacking countries and beating them down and trying to keep them poor, we'd restructure the role of the United States in the world economy. So the United States was engaging in win-win cooperation. So once countries were developing and becoming more developed and more economically strong, at the same time we traded with them and we developed and we got more economically strong. Win-win cooperation. All eyes on development. Economic development is the road to peace. And it always has been, right? When people have a decent life, that's how things improve. That would be one thing in terms of U.S. foreign policy. Another thing would be that we would call for peace on the Korean Peninsula. U.S. troops would be withdrawn from the Korean Peninsula. U.S. It'd be good relations with Cuba. There's plenty of things I would do. So you asked me about Progressive Party in terms of the AOC wing and what they want. I answered it. I gave you a vague assessment of what I want. On to the next question. All right, the Iraq War under the rug. Yeah, good question. How have they swept it under the rug? So, the UN told the United States not to invade Iraq, did not give approval to the United States for invading Iraq. The USA in 2002 and 2003 was going around telling the world that the way, that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Do you remember that? Weapons of mass destruction. And if we don't invade Iraq, there could be a mushroom cloud in a U.S. major city. Oh, my God, it's so awful, right? You remember this? I remember this. Oh, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Look, 9/11, sure, Saddam Hussein is a Ba'ath socialist, but, and Osama bin Laden is a Wahhabi. But, hey, there was no weapons of mass destruction. It was all a big, fat lie. They knew it was a big fat lie, right? They tortured somebody until they said it and said, "Aha! See, he said it," right? But it wasn't. There were never any weapons of mass destruction. But because they told the world there were weapons of mass destruction, and even though the UN told them they couldn't do it, and even though most of the NATO allies were not on board with it, the USA unilaterally invaded a country, bombed it to shreds, killed hundreds of thousands of people, right? And ever since that invasion in 2003, Iraq has been in chaos as a country. It has been in utter chaos as a country. No stability, terrorist groups, sectarianism. It has been an absolute disaster. And we just elected a president who was all about it, who thought it was a great thing, has never apologized for supporting it. Think about that, right? I mean, it's been swept under the rug. It's been swept under the rug. Everybody believed it. Saddam Hussein is a dictator. He's killing people. He's torturing people. And the USA just wants to free the people. I mean, this is a crime. I mean, the Iraq War is a crime. And you'll notice that all the people that support it don't get canceled, right? There's this huge effort to cancel anybody who says the wrong thing, or anyone who writes the wrong thing, or anyone who supports existing socialism. You support a dictator, or but for some reason, people who were big supporters of the Iraq War, like Joe Biden, like Hillary Clinton, hey, what? I mean, it's amazing. They just get this pass, right? Bernie Sanders was against the Iraq War, and he spoke up against it. That was good. Barney Frank spoke up against the Iraq War, I believe. But most of the Democratic Party they were ready to just march in to invade Iraq. And if you didn't agree with that, you were a traitor. Unbelievable. Farhad was murdering Iran scientists, a push to trap Iran in a destruction-grinding war. All right, I'll write that down. killing scientist trap for Iran? Question mark. Alrighty. All right, imperialism and brain drain. Well, look, folks, the United States, we have the worst educational system in the Western world. It is our American education system is abominable. It is awful. We have the lowest scores in math, the lowest scores in science, and, we walk around. There's so many videos where they walk and they ask Americans on the street, point to this country on a map, and they can't find it. They can't find their own country. They can't find the country we're bombing. I've done this. I walked around and asked Americans to find North Korea on a map, and none of them could find it. And, it's embarrassing how badly educated our population is, right? And it's an outrage. And I feel like we as Americans, we laugh about it too much, right? We think it's not a big deal. We just kind of laugh about how stupid we are, but it's not really funny. Like, we have not gotten a good education, right? We as a country don't know our own history. We don't know, we don't know our own history. We don't know anything, right? Our population has been so dumbed down and stupefied by the media and by a really awful educational system. And it's an outrage. And we should be really, really angry with it. But the only way our leaders get away with all the crap they get away with is because of this, right? You listen to Donald Trump's speeches, right? Donald Trump is up there and he repeats the same thing over and over and over again. Why? Because it's like, he's speaking to an audience of people that have just been dumbed down their whole lives, right? I'm going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. Now, who's going to pay for it? Mexico. It's like this constant repetition, or else people won't remember it because our minds haven't been trained to, think things. Pray for Korea. Pray for Korea. Our minds have been trained not to even retain information, right? It's just unbelievable. So here's the thing, right? And this is, and I've talked about this before, right? That there is a big issue with the fact that in the United States, we don't train engineers. Our population aren't becoming engineers. Our population aren't becoming scientists. Our population, we don't train even that many doctors, right? During the Cold War, it was basically set up that in the developing world, we made a point of courting the people in the developing world who were high achieving. And many countries in the developing world have, they provide healthcare, they provide education to their populations, especially the socialist countries. And so these people, they go to Cuba. In Cuba, there's a lot of this, right? Cuba has a great medical school. And there's many examples of Cubans will go to Cuba, they're in Cuba, Cubans in Cuba go to their great medical school, and at taxpayer expense, they get a great medical education, and then they go, oh, I'm oppressed, and they run to Miami, and they start practicing medicine in the United States. Right? And they start making all kinds of money with that education they got in Cuba. Right? And Cuba has lost a doctor. They have plenty of doctors in Cuba, but this happens, right? And all over the world, if you go to the doctor in the United States, right? A lot of times you're going to have a doctor from India. You're going to have a doctor from Russia. You're going to have a doctor from Brazil. You're going to have, and I'm not anti-immigrant, right? I believe that, it's great that we have people from other countries in the United States. Never would I say that, people who speak another language are not welcome, or that's not where I'm going with this at all. But the thing is, we have a setup where we rob the third world of its doctors and of its engineers and of its scientists, and we don't train our population. We maintain an awful educational system here in the United States, right? Our educational system in the United States crumbles and gets worse every year, and it's all okay. Meanwhile, developing countries don't retain their intellectuals, right? And this has happened. It's a big problem in Russia, right? In Russia, they have a lot of very high achieving young people that are very smart. And achieve very well, and they get education in Russia, and then they run to the West, and they move to the West, and they just live in the West, right? And it's a big problem for Russia because Russia needs engineers and Russia needs scientists. India has this problem. Brazil has this problem. It is a big, big problem the brain drain. And the brain drain is bad for those countries in the developing world because they lose their high achieving, smart people. It's bad for them, but it's also bad for average Americans. Why? Because we can maintain this awful educational system, right? Our leaders are not forced to get their act together and clean up American education. And for years, it makes me so angry. John Stossel, do you know John Stossel, the libertarian? He made this TV this TV series in the 90s. Are we really number one? It was pushing libertarianism, and he was talking about like low achieving in American education, and look how much smarter people are in France. Look how much better the schools are, and that all that's true. And then so we need school choice and privatizations. I mean, how is that the answer, right? They don't have school choice and privatizations in France. They don't have school choice and privatizations in Norway. The government is more involved. But they can lie like that. Libertarians love to lie like that, right? So it's like, oh, okay, well, the problem with American education isn't as good as it is in Europe. So more school choice, and we've been doing this for years. School choice, right? The charter schools, schools for profit, taking apart the public education system, breaking the teachers unions. Obama was all about this, right? With the Teach for America program. The Teach for America program was big under Obama. Betsy DeVos, who's Trump's Secretary of Education, she's all about this. Charter schools, schools for profit, making American education just worse. We have been doing Milton Friedman demented free market experiments in American education since the 70s and 80s, and it's been getting worse and worse and worse. If you were going to save American education by privatizing it, you would have saved it already. You would have saved it already. We just haven't done that. It's a disaster. And yes, the brain drain situation where we strip developing countries of their doctors and their engineers and their scientists, and we have an educational system in the United States that's a disaster, so we can't train, our population aren't smart enough to become engineers and scientists because we're not teaching them that way. It's a mess. It's a complete and utter mess, right? And you should be angry about it. I get angry when I think about the school that I went to in Ohio. Right, the education that I got in my small town in Ohio compared to the education kids get here in New York, which is pretty bad in a lot of working class areas, but compared to how bad the Ohio schools were, I mean, give me a break. It is awful. American education is a national disgrace. Jonathan Kozol, who's considered the great scholar of American education, he wrote a book called The Shame of a Nation. Right? He also wrote a great book about Cuba's educational system called Children of the Revolution. And he's the most well-respected scholar in education, Jonathan Kozol, right? And the fact that he wrote a book on praising Cuba's educational system and praising the Marxist educational system of Cuba is something that people like to overlook, right? You'll get a lot of liberals that'll praise Jonathan Kozol, and if you point out, he wrote a book hailing the achievements of the Cuban socialist educational system, they get very, very nervous. But there you go. Alrighty. City of Socialism micro districts. Well, that's very interesting. First of all, that makes me think about how in China, a lot of times when they're implementing new policies, they try them in one city first and see how it went before they implement it elsewhere. And that's something that a socialist state will often do. When they're implementing a new policy or a new program, they'll try it one place first and then change it, and see the results. That's important. The other thing is, though, in Venezuela, they did build socialist cities, right? They built, like cities that were, where there were cooperatives and stuff, and that was a thing that went on. The collectivos and the communes, that's one thing that has gone on, right? And that as Venezuela, was experimenting in how to move in a more socialist direction, there were a lot of like little cities and collectivos and cooperatives that were built by the Venezuelan state. And I would be in favor of that. I mean, obviously, if we had a socialist government in Washington, D.C., they would start to implement policies on a local level. I mean, right now in China, President Xi Jinping is building a model city, where they're putting some of their new green environmental technology into effect. They have the Future Hotel. It's a hotel where you just walk in. Why is the right wing? Okay, all right. Russia and Assad. Right wing. All right. Okay. All right. Now, World War One. The question is the Bolsheviks in World War One. Well, look, the Bolsheviks, they took power on the platform that they were going to end the war. And so when they took office, right, when they took power after the Russian Revolution, they immediately set out to end the war. And Trotsky did not want to end the war. Right? Trotsky had this illusion that, well, now that we're in power, he argued, it was a class war. Right? Well, now we have to keep fighting World War I as communists. We have to fight the German imperialists. And Lenin said, no. We took power on the platform of promising the workers we were going to end the war, so we have to end the war. So Lenin sent Trotsky to meet with the Germans to negotiate the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And Trotsky refused to do it. Right? He came back with no treaty. Right? And he said basically, he had a crazy ultra-leftist position on the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Look this up, right? Trots don't like to talk about this. That Trotsky refused to sign a peace treaty with the Germans. You can read about this. I mean, that he basically, after the Bolsheviks had won the trust of the workers, took power on a platform of ending World War I, Trotsky wanted to keep World War I going. Right? On the basis, well, we're in power now, and so we're going to fight the Germans as communists. And the Bolshevik Party had to twist Trotsky's arm to get the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk signed. Right? And the Bolsheviks ended World War I because they had to keep their promise. They took power, they were brought to power on the platform that they would end the war, and so they had to do it. And so they ended World War I, and they gave up a lot of territory, right? They were in a position where they had to end the war. So the Bolsheviks did sign away a lot of territory over to Germany and Poland and stuff. And that is something that a lot of Russian nationalists will criticize the Bolsheviks for and criticize Lenin for. They say, look, he gave up a bunch of our territory. And that is one thing that is a point of criticism that you'll hear in Russia nowadays. Many Russians feel like Lenin was irresponsible in how he gave up Russian territory. Well, they had to end the war, and the Germans had the upper hand, and so they had to end the war. Now, the Russian Civil War happened afterwards, so they couldn't, stop that. But they had to fulfill their promise. They had to fulfill their promise. Had to do it. Okay. Self-determination for Hawaii. Yep, I'm for that. If the people of Hawaii want independence, right? If the majority of the people there, and most especially the indigenous population there, feels Hawaii should no longer be part of the United States, I'm 100% for it. Self-determination for Hawaii, right? I would be for the independence of Hawaii. Now, to be fair though, right? If the majority of the indigenous people didn't want that, I wouldn't force that on them. Right? And that's one thing you have to be careful with all of this, right? Right? It's like the Black Belt South, right? If the majority of black people in the United States wanted to form an independent black republic in the U.S. South, and there was a clear feeling among black people in the United States that they wanted an independent black republic in the U.S. South, I would be for it. However, if I, as a white guy, start walking around and saying, hey, you guys should have your own country, and it looks like segregation. It's a little bit weird, right? And the same for Hawaii. If I started going up to native Hawaiians and saying, hey, I think you all should be your own country. You don't fit in with the rest of us. It would look weird. Okay? It would look a little bit weird. But if it's very clear, and I've never been to Hawaii, I have no idea what the feeling is. But if it's clear that the feeling among indigenous Hawaiians, and even among all Hawaiians, but most especially among the indigenous Hawaiians who've been there and were always there, if their feeling was, we want to break away, 100% self-determination for Hawaii. But there may be a feeling, you never know, right? There may be a situation where the majority of Hawaiians would feel like, you know what, we want to stay part of the United States. We want special autonomy, we want special representation, but we as a community don't want to break away, and I would respect their right to stay within the United States also, right? You have to remember that the question of separation or integration is up to the colonized people. It is not up to the government or up to some other force, right? And that if a group of colonized people want to be, integrated, they have the right to do that. If they want to separate, they have the right to do that. And it is more about what they want and their ability to choose that as a community rather than simply about declaring them, right? And the same goes, some people feel Appalachia is a nation. If the majority of Appalachians wanted to break away, I would support their right to do it. But I wouldn't go around saying, you Appalachians are not like the rest of us Americans. I think you should have your own. I wouldn't do that, right? Because that's not how these things work. All right, 1949. 1949, Sam Marcy, who was a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, wrote a document called The Global Class War and the Destiny of American Labor. And it was a document he wrote as a Trotskyist criticizing the anti-Soviet direction that the Socialist Workers' Party and the Fourth International was moving in. That document is on the internet now. It is available. However, it was very hard to find. It was referenced in a lot of books, but you couldn't find it, right? It was a long time. I remember it was like, I think it ended up on the web in like 2011, 2012, but for a long time it was a whispered about document. There would be references to it in history books of Marxism, but now it is on the web, The Global Class War and the Destiny of American Labor. And that was the foundation of, eventually they called the faction in the SWP that was led by Sam Marcy, they called it the Global Class War Tendency. It was led by Sam Marcy, and it was his spouse, Dorothy Balan. And then there was a former Shakespearean Broadway actor named Vincent Copeland, and there was also a few other people that were involved with them, and they were a group of people, many of whom had been in the Communist Party USA, and then in the Socialist Workers' Party as Trotskyists, and then they ended up as this kind of grouping in the Buffalo wing of the Socialist Workers' Party that eventually broke away and formed the Workers' World Party. I actually made a video on the history, it's called The Legend of Sam Marcy, and with Brenton Langle, the anarchist, I talk at length about the life of Sam Marcy. And I talk about this document in that video, so folks should check out that video I made on the life of Sam Marcy. There's not enough out there about Sam Marcy, and it's almost an oral tradition. A lot of what I said on that video, I never met Sam Marcy. It was just kind of hearsay. It was kind of stories that get passed down. And that's why I called it The Legend of Sam Marcy, because it's like, there's no like written record. I mean, he has a couple obituaries. There are some like tributes to Sam Marcy that was published, but there was never like an autobiography. There was never, it was all very loose and vague. So, I made that video, The Legend of Sam Marcy. I was able to find some actual footage of Sam Marcy. I was able to find a lot of photographs. And, Marxism is a big deal on the U.S. left. You got the Workers' World Party, which he started. I was in the Workers' World Party for 8 years. So, just to full disclosure, I'm no longer affiliated with them. I'm sure they vehemently disagree with a lot of what I say and do now, but that's okay. There's that. There's also the PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And that is a Marcyite party. There's Struggle La Lucha, Socialist Unity Party, and that's a more recent breakaway from the Workers' World Party. There's a group of people in Detroit who call themselves the Communist Workers League. There's that. There's also, I believe, there is a group in New Orleans now called the New Orleans Workers Group. I believe it's led by somebody who was in the Workers' World Party for a long time, and they study Sam Marcy. So it's an influential tendency, and it's interesting because you don't have this. They're Trotskyists, and I think a lot of them kind of still consider themselves Trotskyists, but they take, anti-imperialist, hardline Marxist-Leninist positions on international issues. It's kind of a uniquely U.S. formation. And it had a lot of influence. I mean, Sam Marcy was a very important dynamic organizer in the post-World War II era, right? In the 1960s, he was key, 1960s and 70s. He was kind of key in maneuvering for an anti-imperialist and Marxist-Leninist position in the New Left, and getting young New Left organizers to be anti-imperialists. And he was an interesting figure. Alrighty. Was Marx anti-Semitic? Well, it's interesting, right? So, like, they can't make up their minds, right? So sometimes, you'll get anti-Semites who tell you that Karl Marx, Marxism is all a big Jewish conspiracy, right? That's standard. But then you'll get people on the left that say Karl Marx was an anti-Semite. Well, look, there's certainly some sentences in that pamphlet on the Jewish question that are not nice. That would certainly be offensive to people of Jewish descent. But Marx himself was of Jewish descent. I mean, he converted when he was a teenager. Officially, he converted so his father could get a government job. The whole family had to convert. But, and I guess there was a debate. The context of that essay there was a debate in the Jewish community about should the Jewish community integrate into wider German society or should they not? And Marx felt like, the Jewish religion and the Jewish community itself, that they didn't really gain anything from by being separate. And so, in kind of anger, he wrote, he wrote, a lot of denunciations of the identity that the Jewish community was rallying behind. And I think that's the context you have to understand that in. He's saying that basically he's arguing that the Jewish community and the Jewish culture had been corrupted by capitalism, and that they're really the things that the Jewish community was rallying around that made them separate from other Germans were superficial. And that's what he was saying in that particular pamphlet. And he was arguing that basically the Jewish community should instead, integrate itself more deeply into German society. I think that's what he was arguing in that pamphlet. It's very strange. It's a very strange pamphlet. And it's one of those early Marx pamphlets, the early Karl Marx when he was in his philosophical stage. You have to remember that. Like Marx, he started out writing about philosophy. Then he wrote about politics, and then he wrote about economics. He went through like 3 stages, right? First, he was a young philosopher, a young Hegelian. Then he was a revolutionary writing about politics, and then in his final years, he was an economist. And the young Hegelian Marx, right? The Marx who's constantly writing about Hegel and the German ideology and the Holy Family. I mean, that Marx, the philosopher Marx, says a lot of very, very strange things, and is very focused on philosophy. Marx the Revolutionary is much more coherent, though sometimes Marx the Revolutionary is a little bit bombastic, right? It's very difficult to get through. For example, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte he's writing at the top of his lungs, right? It's like he's shouting at you for page after page after page, and you're like, and so that can be a little bit difficult. But, the Communist Manifesto is great, and there's a lot of very, very good pamphlets and polemics from the political Marx. And then, the final years, you have the economist Marx, and that's Capital, right? And, Capital, theories of surplus value, wages, prices, and that the economic work is the most valuable. So, that's my argument there. And that pamphlet, that gets referenced a lot that Marx wrote, that you referenced there. I mean, that pamphlet, yes, a lot of sentences from it taken out of context are quite offensive. So there you go. Yeah. All right. All right. Now, David Fox asked about a specific book that was an introduction to political economy, which I'm not familiar with. But I've actually, I've really enjoyed I think John Eaton, who was a member of the Communist Party, wrote some books on political economy that were very good, that were introductory. Victor Perlow also wrote some books on political economy that are very, very good, very introductory. I really enjoyed Victor Perlow's work on economics. Victor Perlow had some great stuff. In terms of like introductory Marxist economics texts, there's actually a pretty good book called Economics: A User's Guide that I really enjoyed. I think Richard Wolff and others have recommended that book by a British Marxist professor. There's a lot of very good stuff out there that's like introductory, like basic Marxist economics texts out there. Like I said, I really enjoyed Victor Perlow. I really enjoy, John Eaton on economics. There you go. I haven't read Mr. Lenatov's book, but I'm sure it's great. All right. Poverty alleviation in China. Well, they have ended extreme poverty in China, right? They have declared that they have reached their goal of eliminating extreme poverty in China. That's a huge victory, right? Many parts of Tibet where the people lived in utter poverty and didn't have running water and electricity, they've been moved to modern housing units and they have access to highways. That's really amazing what they've done. The Uyghur regions, they've been, all kinds of industry and electricity has been brought in. That's really, really tremendous what's been done. So it's, it's really, really, China has had huge achievements. Look, people want to criticize China all day. I'm saying, does the words 900 or 800 million people raised out of poverty mean anything? It makes me so angry. You'll see these libertarians. They'll be like, oh, capitalism's bad. Well, in the last, 50 years, this many million people have been raised out of poverty. How many of those were in China? That's the result of the Communist Party's work. And beyond China, how many of the people that were raised out of poverty in Africa? It's been because of China's investment. How many of the people that have been raised out of poverty in Latin America? It's been because of the Bolivarians and their cooperation with China. So it's like they want to say capitalism raised all these people out of poverty. No, the Communist Party of China raised people out of poverty. Bolivarianism raised people out of poverty. The One Belt, One Road initiative raised people out of poverty. It's infuriating when they raise that. Oh, look, all these people were raised out of poverty by capitalism. Wrong. Wrong. Go to Haiti. Go to the Dominican Republic. Look at countries like Nigeria, where Wall Street capitalism has its grip on the country and it's just kept in chronic poverty. It's when countries break free, like China did, that they start to raise out of poverty. Look, in the 90s, when Russia was having free market experiments with Boris Yeltsin, and it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare when they had their free market policies in Russia. Putin fixed Russia. He saved Russia from the nightmare of the Yeltsin years by recentering the economy around oil and natural gas that were under the state, the two state-run energy firms, Gazprom and Rosneft. Right? So, yeah, Russia, they're like, oh, the Soviet Union was so bad. Well, the Soviet Union had economic growth. The big economic problems came when they restored capitalism. The 1990s, they had free market policies, and it wrecked the country. And then Putin fixed it by putting the economy once again centered around the government, around Gazprom and Rosneft. So, China, right? It was totally a nightmare. 1949, communists came in, built infrastructure, power plants, water treatment facilities. The Deng Xiaoping era, they really start, having foreign investment and utilizing foreign investment to help their state central plan. Millions raised from poverty, socialism has raised millions from poverty. Cuba, compare Cuba to any developing country. Look at for the longest time, right, until the recent coup, Bolivia had the highest rate of GDP growth of any country in South America. But where were the articles saying that socialism did that, right? All of Venezuela's problems, oh, look, socialism, see, socialism. But where were the articles when Bolivia was the most prosperous and most fast-growing economy of South America? Where were the articles about it? Where were the articles in the American press praising socialism's achievements? Where were they? Of course, they weren't there, right? Because there's bias, because American media is propaganda. All righty. Will Biden continue the aggression against Iran? I don't know. I think he probably will, right? The thing is that when Trump killed Qasem Soleimani, after ripping up the Iran nuclear deal, he made it very, very, very difficult for any administration after him to engage with the Islamic Republic, right? Iran, for any country to sit down with Iran after what Iran has been through over the past 4 years is going to be next to impossible, right? And any administration, it's going to be next to impossible. And that may have Biden in a situation where he just continues escalating, right? And the other thing is that Biden has made a lot of compromises with the neocons, right? His administration is full of neocons. This is not Bush. This is not Bush being replaced by Obama. This is a lot of people in the conservative Republican camp entering an alliance with Biden against the right-wing demagogy of Trump. And based on that, I expect that Biden will be significantly more of a war hawk than Obama was. And that's something to think about. All righty. Why did Richard Spencer, he's like a white supremacist, white nationalist, why did he support Biden? He's a troll. Like, look, the way that guy talks, he talks like this. He doesn't talk in a normal voice. He talks in a I'm trying to say. He doesn't speak in a normal voice. Look at that. Whenever that guy speaks, it's like, hey, did you know? So he's always trying to get a rise out of people. So what he does is he takes positions that are the opposite of what you think he's going to take, because then people will talk about me on social media. He's some kind of weird Gen X edgelord kid, okay? And he loves to get attention for himself. He loves to offend people. And so, so it's everyone is calling Trump a white nationalist, a racist, or whatever. So, of course, I'm supporting Joe Biden. And Richard Spencer, he likes to get attention for himself. He's racist, and he likes to get attention for himself. That's about it. Right. So, I don't take him seriously. I had the opportunity to debate Richard Spencer and I declined it. You know why? I declined it because I knew that Richard Spencer didn't want to debate communism with me. He wanted to debate, aren't white people a nation and shouldn't there be white separatism, right? And I saw that. And actually, when Jason Unruhe debated Richard Spencer, I saw that coming. I saw it coming a mile away, right? I will debate people on the right. I debated Stefan Molyneux, and that was I blew him out of the water. That guy just completely, he went down crying, right? And he was just like, he was not ready for what I came with, statistics, facts. He was just, I debated Augustus Sol Invictus. Again, another situation where he was not ready for what I was going to say. But, if I debated Spencer, he would just sit there and he wouldn't, he likes to play the game. Oh, I'm for socialism too, but I'm a white supremacist, that's not a productive conversation. Not a productive conversation. I wanted to say this, right? White nationalists, right? I mean, they're associated with all the evil Jim Crow segregation. They hate immigrants. They celebrate, murders of oppressed people. They're awful. But put all of that aside for just one moment, right? Let's pretend that there wasn't that. Let's just pretend that all the obvious reasons to hate white nationalists weren't there. Do you think that in this society at this time, that there is any possibility of achieving what they want? I mean, think about it. This country is so integrated, right? You can go to the poorest, most remote, rural white community, and you are going to find people from India. You're going to find people from Latin America. You're going to find people of color, black people. I mean, we as a society have embraced integration. We are an integrated country. We are an integrated country. We are, right? My little town, I'm from a little town in Ohio, right? When I was in that town, there was a kid from India at my high school, and he was bullied horrendously. They were so nasty to him, because he was from somewhere else, and people bullied him horrendously, and that was awful. There were a few, there were a few kids from Latin America, and, they were seen as, oh, you're strange, you're not from here. There were some black families that had lived in the town for many generations. But now, my town, my little town in Ohio is far more integrated than it once was. There are a number of families from India. There are a number of families from Latin America. There are more black people than there used to be in my town. And my little town, it's like you can't, let's just pretend the fact that these people are basically the modern heirs of the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazis. Let's pretend all of that's gone, right? And let's pretend that we just take them at face value. They say they want to create a separate white ethno-state. That will never happen. White people don't want that, right? White people might be racist. There are a lot of racist people out there, but they don't want a separate white ethno-state. They don't want that, right? And the country is so integrated. It's like you cannot turn back the clock on this. White nationalists are idiots, okay? It's never going to happen, number one. And they're calling for it. They don't really want it. They don't really want that. They want the cops to imprison and beat up more black people. They want, there to be less affirmative action in hiring. They want more anti-immigrant bigotry. They want a bigger police state, basically, in the name of fighting immigration, so that all kinds of people suffer as a bigger police state. They're foot soldiers of the police state. That's basically what they are. There's a huge effort right now among the population to push back against the police state, right? People are tired of the fact that our rights are being taken away, that the state, as our economy is getting worse, they're transitioning this country into a giant low-wage prison. And these people are, in the name of fighting for the white man, they are just foot soldiers of the cops. That's all they are. They are the foot soldiers of the police. That's really what white nationalists are. They are foot soldiers of the police and the police state, which is affecting white people, right? The prisons are full of low-income white people, right? The drug epidemic and opioids, the prisons are full of low-income white people right now. White communities, there aren't white communities in this country anymore, really, but white people are affected by all the things that they fight to do against people of color. All the things that they fight to do against people of color are now affecting the white community, right? So white workers suffer as a result of racism, right? They are simply, they have this rhetoric, oh, we want the white man to have a separate ethno-state, blah, 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 blah. They don't want, at the end of the day, that's all just a utopian fantasy. And it's not utopian, it's like a nasty, racist, reactionary fantasy. But at the end of the day, what they're really doing is they are the foot soldiers of the police state. They are the foot soldiers of ICE. They're the foot soldiers of the local police departments that don't want more regulation and want to be able to want to be unleashed to commit brutality, right? That's what they are. They are the foot soldiers of the police state. And with their racism and with their hostility toward the black community that is in rebellion against police brutality right now, and creating political space for all working people through that rebellion, with their hostility of it, they are simply they are foot soldiers fighting to roll back the political space created by Black Lives Matter. That's all they are. They are foot soldiers of the police state. They want to pretend they're something else. They want to pretend that they're Nazis, or they want to pretend that they're, fighting for the self-determination of the. At the end of the day, all they're doing is they are the foot soldiers of the police state. They want ICE kicking down doors. They want us all to have national IDs to prove that we're not immigrants, so that the government, has to track every person. They want people to get, locked in prison on slightest suspicion. They pretend that they're something different. At the end of the day, they are foot soldiers of the rising police state, because the police state has always been the hardest on people of color, right? I mean, always people of color have been the main, the biggest targets of the police state in the United States. So as they mobilize to push back against black resistance, they are trying to set the stage for a huge crackdown on the rights of all Americans. And that's really what they're doing. And a lot of them hate the government, right? I think a lot of them, if you were to talk to them, they would hate the government. They would tell you some anti-Semitic conspiracy theory about the government, But at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're setting the stage for a huge crackdown. And that's what happened with Hitler in Germany, right? Gregor Strasser and and a lot of the Nazis, a lot of the original Nazis had this kind of weird, racist, anti-Semitic, but pseudo-revolutionary vision. They thought they were going to create some, Aryan paradise or something. Look what they created. They created Nazi Germany. They created an authoritarian military state, right? And before, in order to do that, after Hitler used the stormtroopers to come to power, he rounded them all up on the night of the long knives, right, and shot them, right? What's his name? The gay Nazi. What was his name? The guy who was the head of the SS. I can't remember. Ernst Rem, right? Ernst Rem. Gregor Strasser blew them away. He used them to create chaos. He used them to kill communists and leftists. And then, after he took power, he exterminated them, right? And that's what would happen to these guys, right? If these guys ever got what they wanted, right? If they ever were able to, violently create enough terror and violence, basically, that the democratic institutions of the USA were overturned, and and people aligned with them came to power, they would be getting the firing squad next, right? And we'd be ruled over by the Pentagon brass. We'd be ruled over by the authoritarian elements. They are simply unknowing puppets, right? They are tools of the authoritarian apparatus of the U.S. states. They're tools of the prison industrial complex. They're tools of the Pentagon. And they don't know it. They're fanatical people. They're hateful people. They're bigoted people. And they think they're fighting for one thing. In reality, what they are is they are hoping to set the stage. They're being used to set the stage for a brutal authoritarian police state, something that they themselves wouldn't even like. So, put that in your pipe and smoke it, right? The white nationalist element, not only are they disgusting, not only are they racist, but at the end of the day, they are setting themselves up for making their lives worse. The way that white workers in the United States will advance is with solidarity. Black and white unite and fight. When black people advance, white workers advance. There would be no public education in the United States if it weren't for Reconstruction, right? There would be things would be far worse, right? There in the United States, we never would have unions in factories. We would never have had the labor movement if it weren't for the fact that the Communist Party made a point of fighting against racism and integrating the labor unions, right? It was the industrial unions that made Detroit what it once was, and made that that prosperous middle class of the United States happen. Those industrial unions were integrated unions. Black and white unite and fight. That is the road forward, and always has been. When things get worse for black people, when the conditions of oppression, when the boot heels of oppression get tighter on black people, all working people suffer. When black people are winning victories against the police state and against racism, all working people benefit. That's just the reality of U.S. history. Look at U.S. history. When black people are winning victories, all workers are winning victories, right? When the most oppressed are winning victories, all workers are winning victories. When the most oppressed are being, just choked and brutally repressed, all workers are being repressed. The 1990s, right? The time when the prison industrial complex was rising. Was that a great time for the white working man, right? Was that a great time? Was NAFTA? I mean, give me a break. Give me a break, right? That racism hurts all working people. And, when you take one section of society and castigate them and repress them and mobilize society to come down on them, that is a way of hurting everyone. When you can oppress one group, you can oppress all of society, right? And this is the reality, right? So racism hurts all working people. And, in the 1990s, when they were doing the prison industrial complex, they also did NAFTA. They also got rid of welfare as we know it, by targeting the black community in the 80s and 90s with welfare reform, with the prison industrial complex. By targeting the black community, they made life worse for all working people. All working people suffered as a result of the grinding wheels of racism and repression. Black and white unite and fight has been the way forward. When the black community is winning victories, all workers benefit. And so, we need to just get out of our minds any notion of white nationalism and all of that. Solidarity is the way forward. Solidarity is the way forward, right? And the problem is that the SJW left has forgotten this. They've forgotten this. The SJW left, they don't want solidarity. They want to shame white workers. They want to make white workers feel like they have it too good. Well, you can't tell anybody they have their life too good. Nobody wants to hear that their life is too good. And there are a lot of low-income white workers who are suffering and have relatives in prison and have relatives who died from opioids. And yes, their conditions would be a lot worse if they were black or brown. No question about it. The police would be harder on them. They would have a lot less opportunities, if they were black or brown, and that needs to be recognized. But at the end of the day, if you go up to a working class person and your message is not the way for your life to get better is to stand arm in arm with your class brothers, if your message to them is, oh, you who do you think you are? You've got it too good, you're going to get nothing but hostility. And the SJW left, with their constant demonizations of low-income white workers, is not helping things. It's not helping things at all, right? And the SJW left is largely not working class. I mean, this stuff comes out of Harvard and Yale, the white skin privilege and all of that. It comes out of the most elite universities. And, I'm from Ohio. I'm from a small town, right? And when I first moved to New York, and, people would come up to me and say, oh, I love your accent. And I'd be like, what accent? And I remember a lot of things, right? There's a lot of bigotry against low-income white workers, not by black people, not by brown people, but by people from New England and people from wealthier backgrounds and people from New York City, right? There's a lot of arrogance, right? There's a lot of assumptions that if you were a working class person, if you're from the South, if you're from the Midwest, and there's a lot of assumptions that you're white trash, that you're in the Ku Klux Klan. That and that's wrong, right? There's a lot of scapegoating and demonization of low-income white workers. And then there's also a lot of people who think low-income white workers don't exist. They exist, right? There's a lot of low-income white people. I went to school with a lot of kids who grew up in trailers, there's a lot of low-income white people who've really suffered. And when the left gives them the middle finger, and tells them, oh, you've had it too good, shut up, white man. That doesn't help. It doesn't help at all, right? What is missing is solidarity. Solidarity. White workers gain when black workers gain. That has always been the communist line. That has always been the communist line. Since the time of Karl Marx, that has been the communist line. Since the time of Karl Marx, that has been the communist line. Black and white unite and fight. Karl Marx said, labor in white skin cannot be free when labor in black skin is branded, right? This has always been the communist understanding. Racism hurts all workers. The answer is class solidarity. And that understanding is missing, right? And you have, coming from the rich, this kind of vague anti-racism that says white workers need to be shamed. And then, in response, you have demagogy and hate coming from certain demagogues associated with the police state. And it's all a mess. It's all a mess, right? Is killing scientists a trap for Iran? Well, Iran is not stupid, right? Iran is not going to attack Israel, I don't think, right? Is it bait for Iran? It's a humiliation for Iran, absolutely. It's a humiliation for Iran. And Iran will probably respond some way, but Iran is not going to start World War III. They're not stupid. Israel would love that, though, if Iran would make a stupid move that would isolate it. The problem that U.S. imperialism has right now, and the problem that Israel has right now, is that never has there been more sympathy for Iran in the international community than there is now. Right? Iran is clearly in the right. They signed the nuclear deal. They complied with the nuclear deal. And then the United States pooped in their face. That's what happened, right? They signed the nuclear deal. They gave up almost all of their peaceful nuclear energy program. They fully followed the rules. And then the United States not only ripped up the deal, murdered their top general. The whole international community can see through this charade. They can all see through this charade, right? That Iran did everything it's supposed to do, has been a completely principled actor here. And the United States has escalated with Iran, and it's the United States that is causing this problem. The whole world can see that. So right now, Israel and the United States have a bit of a problem because the whole world can see through their malarkey. And that's not a good position to be in if you want to continue to carry out aggression against a country, right? Europe is getting more sympathetic to Iran, right? The European countries are getting more sympathetic to Iran. They're trading with Iran. They're not playing ball with the U.S. sanctions because the USA doesn't have a leg to stand on. The USA does not have a leg to stand on in this situation, right? The USA is the one that's clearly the unprincipled actor here, and the whole world knows that. And that's a big problem for Israel. It's a big problem for the United States. Yeah. Pray for Korea. Indeed, right? I mean, the people of Korea have suffered so much. Their country is divided. Absolutely pray for Korea. Why is the right wing supporting Russia and Assad? They're not, right? Maybe the far, far, far right wing are, and maybe there is a little bit of a difference. There's a difference in how to approach. Maybe they don't want to escalate. But look, Trump has restarted the arms race. He's ripped up so many treaties. The Clear Skies Agreement. What else? I mean, there's so many treaties that ended the arms race that Trump has ripped up. Trump's, attacked the Syrian government, the Syrian Arab Republic, which Obama never would go as far as doing. Trump unleashed cruise missiles against the Syrian Arab Republic, even though it looks pretty clear that, the allegations against them about the chemical attack were not true, and that, there's members of the UN weapons inspection team that don't buy it. I'm just telling you, Trump is not pro-Assad. Trump is not pro-Russia, right? Trump has escalated with Russia like crazy. He's got U.S. troops seizing the Syrian government's oil. Trump is not pro-Assad. Trump is not pro-Russia. Is Biden worse? Biden's announcing that he's going to be worse, so we shall see. We shall see. All right, folks, it's been fun. I always enjoy talking with you all. It's a late night, and it's a good night, and I'm glad we were able to talk about so many different topics. It's really been a pleasure to interact with all of you, so thank you for joining me here on Saturday night. Let's end the way we always end. 3, 2, why am I counting down? All right. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. On that note, folks, good night.